don't think people like to be scared. I think people are scared or have been scared.
Most of the things that scare you, it's horrible while it's going on, and then if everything is fine afterwards, you're like, wow, can you believe that? Can you see what just happened?
I am a little crazy, guys. I am a little psychotic. Be very careful with me, because I mean to do you serious harm.
When you buy a ticket to a murder movie, you want to see some murders, right? You know, I mean, that's that. If I'm buying a ticket to see Fred Astaire, I want to see names, all right?
Horror movies that really work leave you reeling a little, leave you feeling disturbed, feeling as though you can't look at the world quite the same way that you did when you went in.
Good evening, and welcome to Anatomy of Horror. I'm Jeff Yeager. You know, for generations, horror films have captured the imagination of audiences both in this country and around the world. For the next hour, we'll hear from some of the masters of the horror genre and discover the techniques they use to scare us. We'll see scenes from both classic and modern horror films and find out why they scare us. And we'll come face to face with horror's most enduring characters and explore why they intrigue us. So, sit back, relax, and just keep saying to yourself, it's only a television show. It's only a television show.
Why does the horror audience enter the theater? The filmmaker, if he could be standing behind the screen, would say, why did you come into the theater in the first place, dummy?
I think people really are bothered by fears of horror. And they go in to exorcise those fears.
As a young audience, so give me these experiences which, if they were to be happening to me in the real world, would be negative experiences that I wouldn't want, you know, experiences of extreme fear, extreme anxiety, extreme dread. Though my heart may speed up, though my hands may become clammy, though I may even involuntarily leave my seat for a moment, that really there's no real danger in any of this. Give me that experience and give me the thrill that comes out the other side. For phew, I got through it. I lived.
When horror movies work, it's really kind of like a ride like no other. It's just a real jolt.
Dallas?
We like to be scared so that it can be over. We like to be scared so that we can have the sense of pleasure or even heroism or satisfaction out of facing our fears and mastering them.
It was probably around a fire that the first horror story was told. Cave paintings created tens of thousands of years ago by the first primitive humans showed scenes of charging beasts, the first monsters. Hell, an unimaginable place of eternal suffering. The roots of modern horror are anchored in the belief of an absolute pure evil. Religions used various forms of the hell mythology as a deterrent to their believers. Live an evil life and face eternal hellfire.
How do you go about getting an exorcism?
Some of the most powerful horror films ever made are based on the timeless allegory of good versus evil, or God versus the devil. The Exorcist, released in 1973, was a landmark film because of its subject, a little girl possessed by the devil, and for its horrifyingly realistic special effects.
He brought you low by his blood-stained twice. Do not despise my command because you know me to be a sinner. It's God himself who commands you.
in a theological sense of the relationship of good and evil and the combat between good and evil for the world and for the human soul.
When The Exorcist first came out, people were saying, it'll ruin your life if you see this movie. How many, all these people saw it and killed themselves right afterwards, or put it into insane asylums. And the Inquirer was like filmed, was just filled with stories how I saw The Exorcist and shot myself. I saw The Exorcist and, gave up God, or, the atheist who saw The Exorcist and, like, is now a priest. There was a reason why it was blowing people's minds. I mean, it would blow people's minds today if you just made it. I mean, pretty much in exactly the same way.
What do you know about my son?
Everything.
The Omen was another film incorporating the good versus evil theme.
Mr. Horn, this is blackmail, then come out and say it. What is it that you're trying to say? His mother was a...
This time, the unfortunate child Damien isn't merely possessed by the devil, he is the devil. And he makes bad things happen to good people.
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you. Who are you?
That's a long story.
Following in this supernatural thriller tradition is the new film, The Prophecy.
I'm an angel. I kill firstborns while their mamas watch. I turn cities into salt. I even, when I feel like it, rip the souls from little girls, and from now till kingdom come, the only thing you can count on in your existence is never understanding why.
Christopher Walken and Eric Stoltz star as two warring supernatural beings.
Can you keep a secret? The biggest secret ever.
Tell me the truth.
The prophecy tells us that centuries ago, a second coming was foretold. But what's coming isn't what anyone expects.
Did you ever notice how in the Bible, whenever God needed to punish someone, or whenever God needed a killing, he sent an angel? Did you ever wonder what a creature like that must be like?
I can always smell a graveyard.
Scary characters are part of the legacy of horror films, and casting can be crucial. Christopher Walken, a pretty scary modern-day character actor, was ironically not the director's first choice for the role.
I originally conceived the part of Gabriel as a kind of physical, broad-shouldered, almost sort of Dennis Quaid type, that's just sort of all brawn and no brain. And then Christopher Walken wanted to play it, and he's the reverse. He's very intellectual and very moody and smooth, and not a brawny person at all. And it was actually a much better idea than what I had been thinking.
Get away from her. Son of a gun. Priest, wannabe. Figured it out.
Mary?
She won't feel anything, honest. I have to rip her apart, of course.
I think that's one of the reasons that I was asked to play Gabriel, that I am naturally, as you say, foreign. That there's something strange, and it's useful for characters.
You can't have her!
With the advent of the printing press, scary stories began to appear on the printed page. In the 18th and 19th centuries, writers like Edgar Allan Poe created Gothic stories of the macabre. In 1818, author Mary Shelley's tale of a scientist and the monster he created captured the imagination of readers everywhere. It was called Frankenstein. And with the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897, two of the world's most famous monsters came to life. But it was Thomas Edison's turn-of-the-century invention which would bring audiences face-to-face with these and countless other monsters. The motion picture.
Seeing is a very important part of horror movies. The desire to look at the monster in the face there. The seeking out of the monster, the going down that long passageway and opening that door. Unlike a novel or a short story, we can't just stop, close the book, and go somewhere else. The film medium pulls us along in the story in the same way we're yanked down the hall to look at that horrible thing that we don't want to look at, and at the same time we do want to look at.
All that remains of the first monster film, the 1910 Frankenstein, is this one frame. 1922's Nosferatu, made in Germany, is considered to be the earliest existing horror film. It was also the first vampire film. And with the release in 1925 of Phantom of the Opera, horror's first king, Lon Chaney, was coronated.
The trick with silent movies was always to find the visual equivalence of the kind of shock that came on the page and which was more easily done when sound pictures came in. There was no true horror genre until the sound era.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
With the advent of sound, the final building block was in place. Now audiences could hear the monsters as well as see them. The 1930s produced some of the classic films of horror, which to this day remain the standard by which all others are measured. By the 1940s, real horror had overtaken America. Our enemies became the monsters, and Hollywood turned its sights toward the war effort.
In the time of warfare, people's minds are on the horrors of war. Consequently, horror pictures just aren't successful. People want to think of cheerful things, and horror just doesn't work.
But like the monsters they created, horror films refused to die. Beginning in the 1950s, the Cold War, atomic energy, and UFOs became the issues of America, and movies were quick to take them up. Horror and science fiction merged and moved from the medieval backdrop of Europe into our backyards. In 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers showed what might happen if a small town's residents began to be replaced by mindless duplicates hatched from alien pods.
They're like huge sea pods. They have to be destroyed. All of them.
They will be. Every one of them. Listen, we're going to have to search every building, every house in town. Men, women, and children are going to have to be examined. We've got some phoning to do.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers is the masterpiece in which American town, which is very reassuringly familiar, is slowly taken over by this other force, this faceless force, which is replacing human beings that the audience has felt comfortable with, kind of ciphers.
Meanwhile, Hammer Studios in England began producing films that featured classic horror characters, but with a new twist: color. Now, when Christopher Lee bit a neck, the red blood on his mouth heightened the effect. But it was in 1960 that the modern horror film came of age.
This motel also has an old house, which is, if I may say so, a little more sinister looking, less innocent than the motel itself.
Psycho is known as a landmark that everybody has to pay attention to. Hitchcock takes the genre and takes so many elements in the genre and plays with them, pushes them in a variety of ways.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder.
In 1968 came the ultimate zombie film, Night of the Living Dead, made on a shoestring budget, would spawn vast numbers of zombie movie mutations a decade later.
I think Night of the Living Dead was one of the first films that had a kind of a gritty reality to it. We chose for the dark shadows and all that. I love the dark shadows and the shapes that you can make without light.
One of the most notorious horror films ever made was unleashed in 1974, and the genre would never again be the same.
Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a zany masterpiece because it just went beyond the pall. And in many ways, horror films have to go into that area that is beyond taste, beyond civilization, beyond society's approval. That's a hard place to go. It's not a place where you go and then get congratulated.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre sort of flipped things around by bringing out that the horror is in the potential of man.
Horror went into space in 1979 with Ridley Scott's Alien. The story is classic 50s horror. In the 1980s came the era of The Stalker and the sequel.
Must be my imagination.
Jason, Freddy, Michael, and Pinhead all became immensely popular characters in spite of their bad deeds, and horror franchises were born.
The whole idea of genre is sequels. I mean, you could say that every horror film is a sequel of every other horror film. because they often use the same elements. They just reassort them in different ways.
Michael is alive. I can feel his evil heart beating. I can see him just as I did all those years ago, behind these very same walls.
You have to do something that's recognizable and familiar, but on the other sense, you have to deal with things that have not been treated in films or in a way that has been not treated before, and that's a big challenge.
Just what is it about horror films that is so frightening? Well, probably a good place to start is, what are we scared of?
There's a force in all of us that science knows nothing about, the force of fear.
I think death is the ultimate fear. We do not know. It's difficult, if not impossible, for us to envisage an actual afterlife that we know is there. One way or another, we just don't want to admit that this is all there is, that it's going to end.
Death is one of the terrible things that is waiting at the end of the ride. That's for sure. That the ghost train ride confronts us repeatedly. The horror movie does the same thing with images of death. But I think there are many more terrible things than that.
One of the primal fears is falling. Probably goes back to our predecessors that were swinging through trees. One misgrip, fall down to the jungle fire, you're injured. Predators get you, you're gone, you're ripped to shreds. Now we'll go on a roller coaster. We know in one part of our minds, the finest technology has been put into this so that we're going to fall and experience of death fall, and yet at the bottom we're going to swoop out and soar like birds. Wow, elation, death, resurrection. It's all those eternal truths, put into a simple ride. In a sense, a horror film does the same thing. It takes us through the valley of the shadow of death. And with the central character, almost always brings that character out intact.
It's too late, Kruger. I know the secret now. This is just a dream.
I think horror is a subversive genre. It's subversive of all our expectations that the world shall be a certain way. It upsets the course of human nature as we like to presume it to be. I think that's good for us, because the world is not, in essence, a rational place.
Fear is for humans.
It has been said that film is the perfect medium for horror. Larger-than-life images, louder-than-life music and sound, specially created monsters performing in dramatic lighting, shot from unnatural angles and edited together in an unnatural way, all taking place in a dark, unfamiliar theater. But before one frame of film can be shot, there must be a story.
In horror, as in sex, and as in a joke, in laughter, you follow a certain basic curve. You start low and you start building tension. The tension builds, 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 and then it cracks.
Essentially what you do is you put somebody into this space that the audience knows is dangerous. Usually the way you do that is establish right away that there's something that is life-threatening. Somebody gets killed in the first opening frames of the film. And then somebody goes to explore that or see what's going on, and from that time on the audience knows whatever they're dealing with is capable of doing what I saw in the first reel.
Anything interesting in sight?
Well, there are what an experienced detective like yourself could possibly construe as signs of a struggle.
You want to be able to say to the audience, okay, sit down and shut up, because I I'm in the business of scaring you, and I mean to do it very seriously. You go into this kind of wrestling match with your audience where you say, okay, I am a little crazy, guys. I am a little psychotic. Be very careful with me because I mean to do you serious harm.
Darkness is a basic tool. Isolation is a basic tool. Isolation from technical devices that can help you. Your gun runs out of bullets, your ray gun runs out of a lithium crystal, whatever it is. The lights don't work, the telephone's cut off. Your best friend isn't there, the cops don't respond. Essentially what you're paring somebody down is to their naked self. When you're down to that, what do you have to deal with? You know, how can you deal with it if it's just you?
Once the story is created, the real movie making begins. It is at this stage that all the unique aspects of the filmmaking process begin to come into play.
Horror films actually come about as close to pure cinema as you're likely to get. You can have a field day in a way that, you know, might be inappropriate in a drawing room comedy or a bedroom farce.
Moving POV shot is one that suggests that there is something else watching you or moving towards you and that is unidentified. And that sort of UFO feeling or that sense of a predator that doesn't have a persona attached to it but has an intent is just, intuitively very frightening. The low angles, the tilted angles, the angles from straight above, all these angles that are sort of like predator angles, you know, the view that an animal would have if it was crouching on a tree limb above you, or a snake would have if it was looking up at you. All these things go back, I think, to very primal intuitions that, if you are going to be attacked, it'll be from an angle that is not necessarily a human angle.
How many of our nightmares feature scary monsters? It is the job of special effects houses like K&B to reproduce the creatures which reside in the darkest part of our imagination.
Obviously, when people go see a movie, you don't want them to sit there and go, I'm watching a movie. Oh, look, there's a rubber monster. You want people to be really engrossed and sucked into it.
Howard Berger and Robert Kurtzman have been trying to scare people since they were kids.
Where we turn ourselves into creatures or monsters or siblings or friends, try to scare the adults, scare your parents. There's always the element of surprise, the gore aspect that seemed to really work. Yeah, you'd like take a razor blade and cut a little wedge out and put it in your finger and put blood. Like, ah! Mom get all mad at you. Oh, it's just fake.
Their company has grown into one of the biggest special effects houses in the world, having worked on such high-profile projects as Pulp Fiction, Tales from the Hood, and Lord of Illusions. Their latest project is From Dusk Till Dawn, a vampire film starring George Clooney, Harvey Keitel, and Juliette Lewis, written by Quentin Tarantino and directed by Robert Rodriguez.
The reason he stabs Frost is because he runs out of bullets, so he can do his last shot on him.
The life of a K&B monster begins here in a small room, where detailed drawings are created from rough sketches. The intricate, lifelike movements are manipulated by bicycle cable and remote radio controllers.
You want things to move so that it helps breathe the life into it, especially the eyes. The eyes movement and the blinks are really important, because that's where the main focus is. And if the monster's just staring off in space and it's like, this looks kind of goofball.
Teeth are added, as are eyes. Hair is painstakingly applied, and the final result is painted with an airbrush.
But this will glue down onto the actress and make up will be blended, so it all looks like, it won't look like a mask, it all looks like it's part of her.
It takes a team of highly skilled craftspeople to bring a K&B monster to life, but it takes more to make that monster scary.
Having seen so many movies, you already know when something's going to pop out, or something's like a character, just the way a character stands in a frame sometimes. You know that it's set up for someone to pop right behind him or something like that. Seeing that coming, I'm going to try and go the other way with that. And play against what people expect, or set it up to where you think something's going to happen, just by knowing the conventions so well. I haven't seen so many movies that that it'll be fun to play the rules and then play against them somewhat.
Music is another essential ingredient of the horror mix. Composer David Williams has just finished work on the new motion picture, The Prophecy. The supernatural undercurrent of the movie dictated the style of the music.
Well, there's a lot of hymn-like quality, I think, to the music. So
I approached it from a much more subtle standpoint.
Hello there, young lady.
You can manipulate the audience, in effect, make them feel like something's going to happen, and you can make the music swell, you can make it be very dissonant, and that makes them feel unsettled. And then sometimes, conversely, you can play against the grain and be very quiet when something's actually going to happen. And even though the music has a role there, it's a role of being like quiet, out of the way, so that you don't give it away. So then when something does happen, it makes it more shocking.
David works by himself in a small digital studio. The range of sounds that today's synthesizers and samplers provide allows him to expand his musical vocabulary.
One of the common things about fear is just the unknown. So if you use like unknown kinds of musical devices that are kind of weird, there's some things you can do synth-wise that a real orchestra just can't pull off. That gets an audience a little uptight right away.
If music is the icing of a movie, the sound elements are the flower and water. Since most of the sound recorded during actual shooting is not usable, virtually every sound in a film must be painstakingly reproduced and re-recorded, then added to the final audio tracks for mixing. In a process known as photo, artists work in front of a large monitor on a small stage, equipped with just about every single thing that ever made a noise in a movie.
Yeah, that's good. In horror films, you go over the top. And most of the time, my partner and I are going, oh, cringing, because it's so... The visual is bad enough, but then when you put the sound in with it, it's incredible. When it grosses you out, you know you've gone the point to where you need to go, you know.
Horror films present Foley artists with a unique challenge because of the variety of unnatural and quite often gruesome sounds that are needed.
I was trying to find something really hard because he gets decapitated and his head falls onto the ground. I got soup bone.
Celery is good for bones cracking.
So you'd add that with some other gushy sounds and a utensil or two, and, you know, it would sound pretty gross.
Ready for something that screams?
When a sound effect cannot be reproduced humanly, or a special sound effect is needed, the sound effects editor is called on. Sound designer Jonathan Miller is responsible for creating the weird, otherworldly sounds that are an essential part of the horror film sound landscape.
You hear things every day, and sometimes you think, oh, that's kind of an interesting sound. But you have to find something that's going to make people feel uncomfortable when it comes down to horror. And when you're cutting effects and designing sounds, you have a lot of scope. So you don't have to look at the natural side of things. You can go a bit crazy.
John is working on Hellraiser Bloodline, a movie which relies heavily on otherworldly sounds. In this scene, two guards have just discovered a door to a room which isn't part of the building's floor plan.
I'm just going to play it to you with just the production sound so you can see what it's like.
You know, I'm starting not to like this so much. You know, I was just thinking the same thing. Maybe... we should check it out. Speak for yourself. This is getting weird.
Now, with the addition of various synthesized sound effects, the scene comes alive with suspense.
You know, I was just thinking the same thing. Well, maybe... we should check it out. Speak for yourself. This is getting weird.
I love being at the mix, just seeing it all sort of come together. The whole thing comes together, and the music, the dialogue, the effects, and just getting that right balance, and just spending the time getting detail into it. That's rewarding, knowing that it's going to entertain some people at the end of the day. Someone's going to enjoy it.
Clearing, set, and action.
Doug Bradley has been putting the pinhead makeup on since the first Hellraiser in 1987. Over the course of the series, he has succumbed to the process more than 80 times.
At the time, we had no notion that we were creating a cult horror figure. That was not what was in the intention at all. That's all really taken me by surprise, but in retrospect, I can't imagine how we didn't think. When the fans see this image on the screen, they're going to go wild.
Pain has a face. Allow me to show it to you.
Gary Tunnicliffe is the special effects artist who transforms Doug into Hell's Black Prince.
Well, due to the fact that Pinhead's got no hair, and to make it so I've got a smooth surface to glue the appliances to, what we do is we put a ball cap on first. This loses Doug's hair and gives us a smooth surface to put the rest of the makeup on.
Unlike the extremely toxic materials used in the horror makeups of Lon Chaney, today's state-of-the-art materials are actor-friendly. And because of the delicate nature of the foam latex, the handmade pieces cannot be reused.
We have to make a new piece every day, and we have to hand pin every piece. So every night after a pinhead makeup is done, we take the pins out, we clean them, and then we stick them all back in, all 108 of them.
When the makeup process is finished and I look in the mirror, I can't see me at all. I can only see the character.
I never saw you in your dreams. No.
If you had, you would have woken drenched not in sweat,
But in blood. Darkness is where you find me. This is a game, and now it is time to play.
If somebody had told me 10 years ago that this guy with pins in his head would be, you know, some kind of horror icon, I would have said nonsense. I would not have even thought about it. The audience teaches you that. The audience says, well, I like this. This is, I want to travel with this guy. Tell me more stories about this guy.
It's over now. It ends with me.
Your bloodline may end, but the game goes on forever.
No examination of horror films would be complete. We're not talking about the stars of the show, the monsters.
The 1910 Frankenstein featured a monster which bore little resemblance to the creature personified by Boris Karloff some 20 years later. And it wasn't until 1931 that Bela Lugosi gave this legendary Count Dracula a face and a personality that audiences could never forget. In folklore, a vampire was a malign spirit that refused to join the ranks of the dead, but instead took possession of a body in order to continue the pleasures of the living. In some isolated regions of Eastern Europe, peasants still hang wreaths of garlic over their doors as protection against evil spirits. The original Dracula is thought to have been Vlad the Impaler, the 13th century prince of Wallachia. His father was known as Vlad Dracul, or Vlad the Devil, hence the son's name, Dracula. Dracula came to life in the pages of Bram Stoker's novel written in 1897, but it was Bela Lugosi who transformed the character into legend, first on the stage in 1927, then on the screen in 1931.
Dracula. The very mention of the name brings to mind things so evil, so fantastic, so degrading. You wonder if it isn't all a dream, a nightmare. But no, this is no dream. This is Dracula.
Dracula is a living embodiment of evil. He lives to destroy God's creations. He lives to drink the blood of humans, to kill humans, and in some cases turn them into vampires also, and he is immortal.
That's through my fault. Count Dracula, I am Dracula.
The latest incarnation of the Dracula tale and the film which holds truest to the novel is Bram Stoker's Dracula, with Gary Oldman playing the title role. and veteran filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola directing.
I remember as a kid, loving horror films, and in particular Dracula. And I remember going to the Encyclopedia Britannica as a kid, which we had in our home, and looked up Dracula and went and saw Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, and I was like just thrilled to think that it was really a guy. There really was a Dracula.
I condemn you to living death, to eternal hunger for living blood.
Frankenstein was probably the most famous horror story ever composed. Written in 1818 by Mary Shelley, the tale concerns Dr. Victor Frankenstein, a German student scientist who learns to breathe life into dead flesh and who thus creates a nameless monster. Physically ugly but innately good, the monster turns evil when Frankenstein refuses to accept and nurture him.
Original Frankenstein meant to be more sociological in its horror. I mean, when it was created, it was literate and, was capable of reading, writing, and complex thought. And she invented a basic message of horror, which is Mother Nature is not to be trifled with.
Frankenstein's monster wanders around the countryside, killing small children and innocent villagers, but in his lost soul is this terrible agony, this terrible loneliness, this terrible incapacity to understand what he is, why he was created. And so what the Frankenstein story does brilliantly, I think, is give us two places to sympathize, both the innocent victims of his maraudings and the creature, the marauder himself.
The latest retelling of Frankenstein is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, released in 1993. And as the monster, Robert De Niro. Modern-day horror characters spawned their own franchises.
Please, God.
This is God.
A Nightmare on Elm Street introduced Freddy Krueger in 1984. And the race was on to create stories and characters that audiences would come back for.
Mrs. Strode, Michael Myers has come back to Haddonfield to kill.
The first Halloween debuted in 1978, and the world was introduced to Michael Myers.
Who is this?
The upcoming release, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, tells audiences not only more about the masked monster who terrorizes a small town, it reveals why he kills. The Halloween series has over the years shied away from using movie stars, featuring instead the late Donald Pleasance in the continuing role of the psychiatrist Dr. Loomis, and of course, Michael Myers.
Get him upstairs, now!
The story is Michael Myers and his victims.
The success of the Halloween series is based on the whole Michael Myers character. He is the boogeyman. You can't talk to him, you can't deal with him. He just wants to get you. And he'll do whatever he has to do to get you. And there's like, and that to me is a very scary thing when you can't deal rationally with whatever is coming after you.
Hello? Mom? Wait, who is this? No, this is Beth. What are you doing there? Do you know where my mother is? She's not home. No one is. What's wrong? Is Tim with you? He's in the shower. I'm across the street. I can see you. Beth, I want you to listen to me. Get Tim and get out of that house right now. Carol, what the hell is going on? Beth, look out. There's someone in the room. He's right behind you.
One of the most memorable horror characters ever created is Pinhead from the Hellraiser series. Ironically, it wasn't until after the first Hellraiser was released that Pinhead became a horror icon.
Now, where were we?
the character of Pinhead was a nameless demon. I think he was called the lead Cenobite in the first Hellraiser movie. He was played very expertly by a dear friend of mine, and I think the design of his makeup and his costume and the way that Doug inhabited that makeup and that costume went a long way to giving him a kind of priestly deportment, which was unusual, you know, for horror villains.
In the latest installment of the series, Hellraiser Bloodline, the story becomes epic in scope, starting generations ago with the creation of a puzzle box that turns into a pathway to hell.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
A scientist has unlocked a secret, and the battle for the future of mankind is about to be fought across the boundaries of time.
Welcome to Oblivion.
I think, by and large, horror films deal with things in a way that is beneficial. Very much like nightmares do to the human body and psyche. They are upsetting, they cause sweat, they cause extreme breathing, but they are dealing with something that needs to be dealt with in one way or another.
It gives you a chance to go and in a safe environment scream and shout and do whatever you want and release some of those tensions. And in getting at and exploring your feelings and your fears, I think it in part helps you to conquer them.
The journeys we take in story form, the journeys we first take when we travel to Oz or Never Neverland, the journeys we first take when we enter the dark cellar or the haunted castle, are preparations for, I believe, the journeys that we are going to take in our lives and after our lives. When our hearts will start beating and some much vaster adventure is underway, an adventure which our imaginations are tools to prepare us for.
Well, that's all the time we have. I hope you've enjoyed our look at horror movies. Now, there are thousands of films which could be thought of as horror. We only had a chance to talk about a few, but as long as we continue to go into the darkness of a movie theater with the sole purpose of getting scared, well, you can be guaranteed they'll keep trying to find ways of satisfying the dark side of our desires. I'm Jeff Yeager. Thanks for watching. Good night.